Gotta start with being. Got problems of my own, it's gonna take something more. Like I found my heart in the flame and my core. Cause changing the world starts with me and with you. But are we deaf to the noise, so our soul hears it too? Will I wake up inside, or will it go by in a blur? Just what it's gonna take now if I wanna change the world.
So we know that more than 27 million people in the world involved in that. And as we know, it's a lot of people not reported in statistics. And also another mind-blowing fact is that 1 in 8 children got involved into human trafficking. Just think about it. 1 in 8. It's unbelievable. And the fact that there are lives, it's not just numbers, but lives that are behind those statistics. And I would like to share my story, how I started to get involved with human trafficking awareness. As you know, I'm from Ukraine, and Ukraine is in Eastern Europe. And Ukraine and Eastern Europe known for sex trafficking and tourism trafficking. And we have a lot of young girls, especially those who are vulnerable in our society, like orphaned girls from poor villages. They graduate orphanage institution. In former Soviet Union, we don't have foster care system, but it's institutionals where orphans are all together study and live. And when they graduate, they don't have hope. And that's when predators come in and they say, hey, why don't you go to America? You will make a lot of money. You will come out of poverty. And they purposely focus on orphan girls and boys. And they track them, they follow them, and they meet them, and they groom them, and then they say, oh, give me your passport. And as they graduate, they don't have safety system. They give their passport, and that's when everything starts. And 8 years ago, when my husband and I started to help J1 international students, as you know, they come from 35 countries. Some girls, they come with open heart and big dreams to gain experience in America, and as they work for employer, sometimes employers can be taking advantage of those girls. And we ourselves experienced girls who got into traffic at our doorsteps on Cape Cod. So it's a worldwide problem, as I mentioned to you, and at the same time, it's at our doorsteps. And 8 years ago, God placed on my heart this burden to make a movie in Russian language, a documentary that it's called The Human Trafficking in the Former Soviet Union. And you can look it up if you Google, or on YouTube, if you search The Human Trafficking in the Former Soviet Union. First movie that will come up, it's the movie in Russian with English subtitles. Because what I've learned, American English-speaking people aware about this problem, but those who are from Eastern Europe, this topic is not covered. So my desire was to shed a light on this topic, and we made it in Russian with English subtitles purposely to educate women. And bringing awareness is one of the tools how we can conquer this awful, awful problem. And with that, do you mind if I'll say a word of prayer and commit this evening to God? Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this opportunity to be here, gathered, and our hearts are burdened by this awful, awful thing, human trafficking, and there are lives behind those numbers, Lord. And I pray, God, that you will break our hearts and give us more compassion towards people around us, Lord, and help us to be your lights. Help us to be your feet and your hands and your voice for those who cannot speak for themselves, Lord. We commit this evening to you, and we pray, God, that you will help us, God, and that you will use us to conquer this awful problem. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And with that, I want to give this microphone to Mel, and she will give a presentation about Jasmine Grace. Thank you very much for coming.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm very excited to introduce to you a dear friend of mine. Jasmine and I crossed paths in 2014 when I was 1 year into my career as an advocate in my home state of New Hampshire. I was working at a crisis center and imminent danger shelter for domestic violence survivors as a full-time and overnight advocate. Jasmine came to train a group of advocates I was under for the Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence in New Hampshire, sharing her story bravely and educating us on human trafficking as a whole to better our work with the survivors we were walking alongside with every day. Since then, I've had the complete honor to volunteer alongside Jasmine with her organization, Bags of Hope, and my heart has been really broken for those who've walked this path. No girl, no woman, no boy, no man should ever be for sale. Jasmine has been a good friend to me on my own healing journey as a survivor of child sexual abuse and sexual assault. Like Jasmine, as survivors more than their stories, I have also had the opportunity to use my message of pain to purpose by speaking and walking alongside others as they do the same. It's an honor to share my amazing friend with you tonight. As a survivor of sex trafficking and drug addiction, Jasmine is an effective keynote speaker, panel participant, and facilitator for trainings, workshops, and groups. She has spoken on panels at the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights in New Hampshire and at 2 side panels for members of the United Nations in New York. In addition, Jasmine consults with healthcare professionals, law enforcement personnel, educators, and nonprofit organizations. She advises on issues such as safe homes, program growth, curriculum development, survivor support, and peer mentorship. She is the founder and director of Bags of Hope Ministries, the author of The Diary of Jasmine Grace, Trafficked, Recovered, Redeemed. Jasmine will be selling her book here tonight, and I have 1 copy to raffle off from names who registered online at the end of the event. It is my honor to introduce to you Jasmine Grace. Take it away, my friend.
Okay, I'm short, so I feel like I have to stand somewhere where you guys can see me. Can you hear me and see me? We're good. Okay, so I'm thrilled to be here. Obviously, you'll hear from my accent from the North Shore area. I grew up in Revere, Saugus area. I live in New Hampshire now. So I came down 2-hour drive with my friend Cindy, who's also an outreach worker for us in New Hampshire. I've come a long way. I've been out of the life, clean and sober, for over 14 years. I drive a minivan. I homeschool my children. Like, how could this have ever happened? Only really by God's grace. You can hear me better now. So what I'm here to do is share my story to raise awareness, to help you educate, to understand what trafficking looks like, because I think a lot of times when you have a real face to the word, you can better understand it. And also my book, I think, is really, really eye-opening for people who haven't survived this life, so you can understand what happens in the mind of a victim. So many people say, well, why don't you just leave? Why did you stay so long? And in that book, you'll understand, because I managed to write in my journals the entire time I was being trafficked, and I saved all of them, and so later on when I was able to exit and recover and even found out I was a survivor, I went back into all those journals and I started a blog. And I would write exactly what was down on those pages and then put a little present-day reflection, because I didn't want to leave people hopeless and depressed, right? I wanted to let them know we do recover and we do get better. And so I would put a present-day reflection, and I was able to compile that into a book. So it's my whole time of being trafficked and then into the drug addiction. So it talks a lot about what happens in the brain while you're going through that type of trauma, through drug addiction and recovery, and really what it takes to recover, and how maybe you, someone who hasn't experienced drug addiction and or trafficking, can come alongside someone and support them, because that is vital. You know, women, I'm going to say women a lot because that's my story, but I don't want to say this doesn't happen to men and boys as well. But women really, really need one safe, supportive person to come alongside and help them and support them on their healing process. You can't do it alone. It happens in community. And so I'm thrilled that we're here in a community-like setting, here in a coffee shop. Like, this is just great to gather and to have these conversations. I want you guys to be able to ask questions when I'm finished. So please, if there's something that you think of, don't feel shy, ask me. Let's have a conversation. So anyways, what got me into that life? How did I become trafficked in the first place? How does anyone become trafficked? That's like the #1 question. And it's based on vulnerabilities. Right? So what are some vulnerabilities that you can think of for, say, teenagers or young kids? What are some vulnerabilities that they have? Just shout it out. Isolation, yeah, in today's day and age, for sure. And the internet. Yeah. What? An unsafe home, whether that be experiencing domestic violence in the home, drug addiction, one-parent household when that parent is always gone because they have to work to provide. Absolutely. Abuse in the home. Yeah, looking to further dreams and careers, exactly. Coming out of the foster care system, being, in and out of foster homes, running away, being a chronic runaway. Traffickers know where to hang out, bus stations, train stations, on the certain corners where kids go. My vulnerability was just looking for love and attention. I just didn't receive that as a kid. My mom struggled severely with mental illness. She still does to this day. And my dad provided for the family, so he wasn't around. So I missed that nurture and that care and that love, because my mom could barely take care of herself, never mind me. And I had an older brother who was 10 years older than me, different fathers, and he did experience sexual abuse as a kid. He was probably 7 or 8 years old when he was molested by a family member. So by the time I came around, he had already had that trauma, and he wasn't really interested. So he wasn't like that caring, big, older brother. I was just left on my own. But because, I came from a big Italian Catholic family, I had a lot of aunts and uncles, and I had really loving grandparents. My father's parents were very kind. They were so nice, my nanny and papa, so I call them. And my grandmother would take me to church on Sundays. I would sleep over on the weekends. My nanny would read me bedtime stories and tuck me in. Like those things that showed that I was cared for and that I was loved. And as I look back, I know that planted seeds of love and self-worth in there, but it wasn't enough, right, to help carry me through. And unfortunately, when I was 12, 13, because I really didn't have that parental guidance, I was out on the streets, and I was hanging out with people, and I was doing things I shouldn't have been doing. And I was drinking, and I was partying, and I was hanging out with the wrong crowd. Hanging out with older boys, doing things I shouldn't have been doing. I was raped at least twice by the time I was 14, but I don't remember the details because of the blackouts from the drinking. So experiencing that sexual violence, having a lot of shame, trauma, drinking and drugging and partying, just, attacked my self-worth, it attacked my identity. But I will tell you, I never dreamt of becoming a prostitute, right? That's not something on our list. Little girls don't dream of that. They don't dream of becoming anything involved with the commercial sex trade, never mind becoming a drug addict, right? But something happens along the way. They say that 80 to 90% of women who are in the commercial sex trade have been sexually abused as children, okay? So that dial's already been turned. When you're being sexually abused from a young age and then a trafficker comes along and you're 13, 14, and he promises what was so freely taken from you all these years is now going to get paid for, this seems like an upgrade, right? And they sell it as empowerment. You have to understand the commercial sex trade is sold as empowering and glamorizing. And you can make a lot of money, and you can pay your way through college, and you can have a family and a business, you can have all this stuff. And, you're having sex anyways, you might as well get paid for it, right? So that lie. Also, I grew up watching Pretty Woman. Remember? Who doesn't remember Pretty Woman? And how glamorizing did the commercial sex trade appear? And I'll tell you, my entire 8 years in the commercial sex trade, Richard Gere never showed up with a string of pearls in a Lamborghini. Never happened, okay? And so now what do we have? Our media. It plays a big role in our media and our culture and our society, the way we think of these things. Now we think of the movie Taken, right? We think of girls being kidnapped and stuffed in crates, and yes, does that happen? Yes, women are forced and put into trafficking situations, of course. But the more common way that women get into the commercial sex trade is by the grooming process. And again, if you're being groomed as a child by being abused, when a trafficker comes along, he doesn't have to do so much grooming because you've already been groomed in the first place, right? You follow me? So by the time I'm 19, I graduate vocational high school. I have my hairdressing license. I'm working in a hair salon. I'm going to community college for journalism. I want to be a writer. I thought I'd move to New York City, write for a fashion magazine, and work at a fancy hair salon. I had dreams. I had goals. But this guy comes along. He meets me at a local nightclub. Is anyone here from the North Shore area at all? 1, 2 people. Do you remember the Palace? Okay. Ding, ding, ding. So I'm not that far away from home. Okay. So I was at the Palace nightclub where I shouldn't have been. Underage drinking, had probably been partying in there since I was 14. And this was the average. This is what we did. And a guy comes along who knew some friends of mine. He wasn't a complete stranger. And he offers to buy me a drink. He takes me to the bar, and he spends $7 on me, and I'm completely impressed, okay, because that's all it took. And he had a wad of cash, and he had diamonds and jewelry, and he was handsome. He was dressed nicely. And we exchanged phone numbers, and we got together the next day. And he shows up in his champagne-colored Mercedes-Benz, And I'm intrigued, right? Because I had never dated a guy like that. I had just graduated high school. And he was probably 20, 21 years old, so he wasn't that much older than me, so that wasn't a giant red flag at the moment. But you have to understand, that was also glamorized. There was plenty of red flags. Obviously, if you're not coming from a wealthy family, you're a drug dealer, or you're obviously doing something illegal if you're driving around in that fancy car and you have all this stuff. But again, in that culture and society, that's all glamorized, and that's like looked up to, and you idolize that stuff. And so we begin to date, and he starts to, groom me and manipulate me, make me fall in love with him and trust him. So he played the boyfriend role. So what are some things that you think he may have did to me during that grooming period to get me to love and trust him? Bought me stuff. Yep. Right, provided. That protection or, yep. Right, lots of promises. Even deeper than that, right? Told me he loved me. Okay, and so he played on that. You can have a family. We can have a business. We can, do all this stuff. You'll make so much more money. And so this little by little, planting these seeds of doubt in my mind, trying to make me believe that this would be a good answer. Like he never said, I'm going to be your trafficker, you're going to be a prostitute. It wasn't, none of that language was used. It was sold as glamorizing. It was real sweet talk. And he met my family, came over for Christmas, Thanksgiving. And at the same time, toying with this idea of possibly doing this, I have this best friend who disappears. We're best friends for years, but she gets a new boyfriend and I don't see her for a few weeks, maybe a month or so, which is common when you're that age. You get a new boyfriend, you don't really see her because she's enamored with the new guy. I get invited to a college party at Salem State University where all these college boys are having a big party in the dorm. And they tell me that a stripper is going to come to dance, to be the entertainment. I think nothing of it. Again, I think that's totally normal, no big deal. And we're all there partying until the woman walks in the door and she goes to take off her clothes, and I realize it's my best friend. And I was in shock because I didn't know she had gone into this life. And so we begin to cry, we ruin the party, and we get kicked out. And these boys were mad. And that's a whole other conversation that we'll have later about where, why the commercial sex trade is fueled and how it is fueled. But, so I go back home, I tell my boyfriend what happened. Don't you know, he knows her trafficker. A few days later, he takes me to her house. She lives in Chestnut Hill. She has a Range Rover and a BMW in the driveway. And I come in, the home is big and beautiful, and it's clean, and he has his own room, she has hers. And there was probably 3 or 4 other women living there that either shared a room or had their own room. And I'm realizing she's calling them her wife-in-laws. So I'm realizing the language is different. This whole setup, I have never seen anything like this. She has clothes and shoes and jewelry. And at that point, having a Louis Vuitton bag was like the epitome of success, right? And she had it all. She wasn't beat, she wasn't drugged, she wasn't stuffed in a crate, nothing. She was looking like she was living a good life. And she was calling him her man, and she says that she goes to work and does these parties and goes to a massage parlor, and she gives him the money, and anything she wants, he buys. And she was acting like it was fantastic. So that kind of sealed the deal, right? So I had been groomed, I had manipulated, and then seeing her like she was living like this great life kind of made me feel like, maybe I am missing out. Maybe I'll try, right? And so, do you think that anyone in Chestnut Hill had any idea that there was a trafficker living there and this was considered his stable and there was women living there and coming in and out all the time? No, because nobody's paying attention. Nobody was educated. No one understood this. And that's the thing about prostitution, especially nowadays. Do you remember the combat zone downtown Boston? Well, that's been cleaned up, right? But all they did was push prostitution indoors. It didn't go away mysteriously. And what was happening to those women back then was trafficking as well. But we didn't have the language for that. And because our society kind of gives us the idea that prostitution, like these women choose to be in that life, right? No. Let me tell you, no one chooses to exchange their body with strangers over and over and over again for money all day long. Nobody. It just isn't a thing. No matter what the pro-prostitution movement will tell you. Because there's also a big sweep going across the nation that's trying to legalize or decriminalize prostitution. They want prostitution to be legal, and they want it to be, what's the word? Yeah, like, where you go and get checked, and it's all legal, and, they literally pay you in a check form, and you get tested, and I can't think of the word, but they're trying to legalize it, to normalize it, to make it seem like it's okay. But trafficking will just happen, and it will just explode. So something you have to think about and you have to be careful about, because it's really pushing hard in New England. So anyways, I get involved. I ask my trafficker, my boyfriend still at that moment, if I decide to change my mind, can I stop? And he says, sure. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. So before I know it, I'm sent down to Hartford, Connecticut to work in a massage parlor. I'm sent there with a duffel bag full of baby wipes, condoms, high heels, stilettos, skimpy dress. And I get sent there, this big building in the busy finance district. No one has any idea what's going on behind closed doors. There's a security guard at the bottom. He buzzes me in. I walk in, my name gets changed, right? So there goes your identity. And I'm in this lounge area with all these other girls, probably 16 to 60-year-old women. And the men get to come in and take a ticket and then scan the room and pick whoever they want. And then you go back into this other area where there's 8 or 9 beds, rooms lined up with a bed and like a mattress and a mirror and a nightstand. And you do what you do for the hour, the half an hour, all day, over and over again. And I work from 10 a.m. to 1 a.m. for a few days in a row. And the reason why my trafficker sent me there was deliberate. It was on purpose. They try to break you down as much as they can, emotionally, physically, spiritually, all the ways, because they're trying to break the human spirit out of you to build you back up into a product. Because that's what you're seen as, right? You're not seen as a human, but a moneymaker, a product. And so he sent me to there because it was hardcore, 10 a.m. to 1 a.m. for a few days in a row. And then he'd come back, pick me up, and we'd come home to Boston. And then every few days, I'd get sent back down there. And I'll tell you, the first time I had to exchange myself, I was completely horrified. I was disgusted. In order to cope with this type of trauma, I unplug, right? It was like if you literally just pulled a plug from here. My body disassociated because I couldn't cope any other way. I wasn't using drugs. I was sober. And so I had to unplug in order to survive. But that memory is still burned in my brain. I mean, I remember what the man looks like, his name, what he smelled like, everything. And it's just probably something that will never go away. At the same time, I'm feeling so horrified and disgusted, I remember looking down and seeing all the money in my hand, maybe $80 or $100. My trafficker had also told me I wasn't allowed to come out of each session without less than $100, so I had a quota to make. And so my friend taught me how to kind of do the least amount of work to make the most amount of money. It's just all a game. You know, it's just all this, it's really just a game. And I remember looking down and being like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna focus on that. Think about it, I had worked at a hair salon, maybe making $80 in tips a whole Saturday cutting hair, right, for 6 to 8 hours. Now I just made that in a quick half an hour. So that becomes an addiction, right? And that money runs through your hands. Thinking about those young girls that come out of poverty. They've never seen a $100 bill in their life. This creates an addiction. The money isn't staying in their hands, but it's running through. And then you get addicted to the lifestyle, right? And then your trafficker buys you all pretty things and new shoes and new jackets and pocketbooks and all these cell phones and jewelry. So you become addicted to that lifestyle and you try to like just numb the pain with all the stuff. But the commercial sex trade, whether it's pornography, prostitution, high-price escorting, street prostitution, it does deep, deep soul damage. You are never the same once you come out. It's just a fact. And this is what happened after these few weeks. I'm there working in Connecticut. I go back home to my family. I'd go back to college. I go work at the hair salon, and I started to live a double life. And I couldn't stand it. I couldn't look my friends in the eyes. My parents really weren't asking questions, you know, where I was going. But I couldn't look them in the eye. So I start to speak up and I tell my trafficker, okay, I don't want to do it anymore. I hate the way it's making me feel. And I thought you loved me. You know, how am I having sex with strangers and I'm giving you the money? And like everything just felt real confusing and real shameful. And that's when he starts to use violence as a way to keep me under his control. So you guys all know what domestic violence is, right? We've been educated on that. That's kind of where we are with sex trafficking. We're probably about 15, 20 years into the anti-trafficking movement where everybody's mostly educated and understand and aware. But you have to understand this type of trafficking is like domestic violence, but on steroids, right? Because of the shame that you feel what's happening to the exploitation. And so I speak up, I say I don't want to do it. We're driving home one night from Connecticut. I'm driving, he's in the passenger seat. There's another trafficker, another girl in the back seat. I say something he doesn't like. He backhands me so hard, this side of my head hits the window, and I couldn't see. My vision became blurry. I didn't know that was a thing that you could see stars. I literally did. and I had to pull over, and he just proceeds to take me out of the car and beat me on the side of the highway. And luckily, the other guy in the back seat pulls him off of me, and they threw me in the back seat, and that's when I just cried all the way home to Boston, because I was like, oh no, what did I get myself into, right? When someone starts putting their hands on you, everything changes, you know, and he had a gun, and of course I believed that he was going to use it, and that just started this downward cycle of power and abuse and control and manipulation and fear. So much more damage for 5 more years. So I had become his bottom. They called it a bottom bitch. That was the term they used, right? I was his number 1 girl, so I had to cook, clean, do everything he told me to do, go food shopping with him telling me to go, give me the money to go. Everything was controlled. He brought in tons of other girls that would be considered my wife-in-laws. I'd have to teach them the rules of the game, kind of like how my friend taught me. And from working in Connecticut, he moved me up to another massage parlor in Kittery, Maine. That was a little more high priced. And the way you worked there was you literally went to massage therapy school in New Hampshire. And this school knew that this whole bunch of girls was going to that massage parlor. So they put us in a certain class. They taught us real massage therapy techniques. And after a few weeks and paying I don't know how much money in cash, we got a sealed envelope that was apparently our certificate. And then we brought that to the local lawyer, who then paid off the police chief with a lot more cash. And so this place, if you're ever bored and you have nothing else to do, feel free to Google the Danish Health Club. It was pretty infamous. It was in Kittery, Maine. Very nice, affluent, expensive area. People in the town knew about it. It was kind of like the joke, like the town whorehouse, where all the girls from Massachusetts worked. But no one really knew, again, the depths of why those women are there. Until there was a young girl working there. And this is your common story. But at the time, I was in my own survival, right? I wasn't paying attention to anybody else, but I knew the girl looked young. Average age into the commercial sex trade is between 12 and 14. And this girl was 13 years old. She was a runaway from the foster care system. And the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, I believe, estimates that 300,000 kids go missing each year in the U.S. And about 100,000 of those kids fall through the cracks and end up in the commercial sex trade one way or another, especially because our system is so big and broken, and no one's looking for a lot of these kids. But this young girl had an aunt who kept looking for her and kept calling and calling her social worker, and somehow they put the pieces together, and they found out she got picked up by a local trafficker and brought up to work in Maine. And so they did a lot of surveillance, and it took about 2 years, and the FBI was involved and so forth. And the place ended up getting busted, and it got shut down. Which leads me to say, nowadays you won't see any American massage parlors. What are you going to see? Asian massage parlors. Is any of this ringing a bell? Is there any Asian massage parlors in your community that you can even think of now? If I was you, I would Google, or I would go on to the websites. I would Google their phone number, their address, see where else it pops up. Is it popping up on adult websites? Is it popping up on the adult section of Craigslist, and so forth? You can put the pieces together real easy. You can park outside and watch who goes in, who comes out. Guarantee there's no women coming in or going out, and if you sit there long enough, you'll see the influx of men. Just to pay attention, to be awake, to know that this is what's happening in your own communities. And then you can call the National Center, the National Human Trafficking Hotline Center. You can put a tip in anonymously if you feel like you need to. And the more tips that they get, the more they will call their local police and the FBI and so forth. And then, unfortunately, a lot of times when they get busted, the women, because they don't speak English and because there's a lot of barriers and a lot of brainwashing and manipulation, they don't accept the help. Sometimes they do, but not all the time. They just want to go to Flushing, New York. And that's where they always ask to go, and then it just starts the cycle all over again, and these massage parlors will pop up in other places. It's really common, especially here in New England. But if you see something, say something. I'm not telling you not to. Just please don't try to get involved yourself, but make calls if you have to. So with that said, Maine ended up getting busted. By this time, I tried to escape from my trafficker many, many times. I would always go back home to my parents' house. He would come there, he would badger me, he would manipulate, he would show up with diamonds and cry and promise he would never hit me again and tell me things like, you're a dirty, no-good prostitute. No one's gonna love you. No one's ever gonna marry you. How are you ever gonna make regular money again? You know, and all these lies. And there's always a little bit of truth in a lie, right? So how was I going to go back and make regular money? How can I go from sometimes making $1,000 a day to maybe $8 an hour? You know, like that felt so not possible. And who is going to love me? I am dirty and disgusting. You know, so it just kept going. But during these 5 years, he talked me into going to college. He pulled me out of my first college degree in my hair salon to completely isolate me. But during these few years in, he talked me into going back to get an associate's degree in business so he can open a business as a front. And so I went to school to Bunker Hill Community College, got an associate's degree in business. I made the dean's list. I did really well. I didn't feel any ounce of pride. I didn't feel any sense of accomplishment because I was just surviving. And I knew that if I worked really hard and got that degree, he couldn't take it away. So I worked hard. I saw my primary care physician constantly throughout my entire time of being trafficked. I was constantly going to see my doctor for self-diagnosing myself with depression, anxiety, ADHD. I was just looking for medication. I was looking for a way out. My doctor saw the bruising, breast implants, all types of vaginal issues. I complained of headaches constantly because my body was under so much stress and I literally had head damage. My throat always had a lump in it because my body was physically reacting to the stress that I was under, that I always had something stuck in my throat. All these issues my doctor would see. He wasn't, educated about what trafficking was, so he tagged me as domestic violence, which led me to get one appointment with a domestic violence counselor, and all she did was plant some seeds. And that's what happens in the healthcare setting. These doctors and nurses and people that you will run into, maybe you are one here in this room, but they're just there to plant seeds because victims aren't going to leave the first time. They might not leave the 10th time. It takes so many attempts and so much support and power within yourself to really get out and leave. The people you meet along the way who want to support you are there to plant seeds of hope and just let you know there is a better way, and I'm here for when you're ready to choose that way. And that's what happened. So I knew this was wrong. I knew I didn't want to live this life. I felt hopeless, suicidal. I knew it was so complicated for me to get out, but I got the degree. It had been almost 5 years. Guess what happens? I get pregnant with my trafficker's child. Now, a lot of traffickers do impregnate their women on purpose to keep more control over them, but this was not his deal. And he was forcing me to terminate that pregnancy. And I didn't want to, because I thought the baby would save my life. I could retire, I could have everything he promised, the family, the business, everything. And the time was coming down to Massachusetts where you could no longer have an abortion. I forget what the limit was, but I was trying to hold on to that time to figure, okay, if I make it to that time, then I can't because it's illegal and I won't be able to have one. But he was pressuring me so hard that I knew if I didn't go to the clinic and do it, I'd lose that baby in some other god-awful way. So I did what I had to do, but that changed me. It lit the fire inside, and I was like, you know what? You can use and abuse me all these years, but to force me to take a life, I gotta go. I have to leave. So I started saving money without him noticing. So again, Maine had gotten busted. This is when Craigslist became popular, right? So now he's posting ads of me all over the internet, and I'm working in and out of homes, which is even more dangerous because you're going into strangers' homes. And this leads me into another aspect of why trafficking is so lucrative. Because of the demand, okay? Trafficking wouldn't exist if there wasn't such a high demand for it. And unfortunately, men are the demand, right? And I'm thrilled that there's men here. I'm glad that you're here to hear about this issue, that you have a heart for this issue. I'm not a man hater, right? I'm thrilled, and I want to have more of a conversation. But sadly, the men demand sex. And I can't tell you to how many men's homes I went to when the wives and kids weren't there. How many men would come into Boston on work and meet me at these fancy hotels. Some wives knew that their husbands, bought prostitutes, and some didn't. They were in agreement with their wives that you're not gonna have sex with me, so I'm gonna get sex from a prostitute. And they would tell me some wives are in agreement with this. Some weren't. It was a brokenness. But what is it that drives it? It's the sexual brokenness, right? And where does that sexual brokenness come from? A lot of us in the anti-trafficking movement know it comes from pornography, and that the easy access of pornography nowadays is skyrocketed. Young boys today are addicted to pornography as early as 7 or 8 years old because of the tablets. in the phones in their hands. Think about when we were young, or there's even some of you older than me, when you had to buy a Playboy. You couldn't go to the gas station unless you were 18 and purchase one. You had to like go sneak in your father or your older brother's room to find one. Nowadays, there's no sneaking. It's right there on these tablets. These kids are looking at it. Even young girls are becoming addicted. And it's really messing with the mind. It's really skewing their way that they view relationships and sex and so much. And so if you can't just look at porn, because it gets boring, it's like an addiction, changes the chemicals and the brain waves and everything, and you look for more hardcore porn as time goes on, that's not enough. What are you going to do? Most likely become a purchaser, right? And then strip clubs, and so it's just like a gateway. I hope you follow me. I hope you understand how it just opens up the door. And so seeing all these men in and out of homes and businesses all over New England, getting the college degree, saving money without my trafficker noticing. I'd take a few $100s at the top each time I'd work, and I'd put it in Ziploc bags, and I'd tie elastics around it, and I'd put it in the dirt in my potted plants, because I wanted to save a few $1,000s so I could go at my own apartment. Because every time I went home to my parents' house, he'd find me. So I had a plan. And now I'm ready. I have maybe $3 to $6 grand, however much it was, saved. I want to go get my own apartment. But how does a woman who's been in the commercial sex trade, I don't care if it's a year or 10 years, walk into a real estate agency and fill out an application? She can't, right? Because she has no job. She has no reference. She has tons of debt in her name, probably children to take care of, mental health issues, substance abuse issues, criminal record this thick, felony charges, right? The door just gets that much further away on purpose. Because again, prostitution isn't the world's oldest profession, it's the world's oldest oppression against women and children. It's not designed to empower. It gives you a false sense of power. It gives you a false sense of security. So by God's grace on my life, I meet a sex buyer off of Craigslist, which was regular. I go to his house and nothing happens, but he gives me a lot of money, and we sit there and chat. Week after week, he continues to call me back and give me a lot of cash, and we hang out and watch SpongeBob. Okay? Really random. All right? And so this guy starts to become my friend. And the reason why he's safe is because nothing is happening between us. He was Italian. He was from East Boston. I mean, we could have been cousins, right? And so now when I read prostitution research, it says when a woman's ready to leave the commercial sex trade, she needs one safe, supportive person. So this guy became my safe person. I'm not telling any guy in the room right now to go home and Google and try to like save women from the commercial sex trade. I don't think that would be smart. But this is what worked for me. And so you'd probably go broke really fast. But anyway, so I reached out to him. I wrote him an email. I said, my name's not whatever, it's Jasmine. I'm in a lot of trouble. Can you lie and say that I work for you because you own a small business? And I need fake pay stubs to get my own apartment. I'm in a bad situation. And he said, sure. And he made me the fake pay stubs. I was able to go in, sign the application. Here's all my money. And I got the apartment. Now, my trafficker obviously wasn't going to let me leave with everything that I had purchased. And I left with 2 trash bags. Basically nothing. I walked away from everything. And I called the local police. I said, my boyfriend's going to get mad. When I move, can you come hang out on the porch? And literally the cop stood there. My trafficker was here. I left with 2 trash bags and my cat and my dog. I got into one of the cars that was in my name anyway, and I drove away to my new place. It was big. It was empty. I was hopeless. Again, suicidal. I had no idea how I was going to put my life together, but I knew I didn't want to live like that anymore. I call my mom, because what else do you do when you're in crisis, right? And I'm lucky enough to have a mother who is semi-available, okay? Many women stay trapped in the commercial sex trade and addiction and homelessness because they have nowhere else to return, except for abusers, okay? But again, my parents were always available. So my mom came. I didn't have the courage to tell her everything. She knew I had been in an abusive relationship, obviously, all these years. I told her he made me do things I didn't want to do, but I couldn't utter the name prostitution, right? I couldn't say I was a prostitute. So she bought me some furniture. She kind of helped me figure it out. A few weeks go by, and what do? I panic, and I call him back. Because relapse is a part of the process, sometimes. And there's also rules to this life. If I go out and prostitute on my own, I'm considered a renegade. And if I get caught, I'll get killed. My other option is to have another trafficker purchase me. But I didn't want to go with someone else because I didn't know how much more abusive he was going to be than that guy. So at this point, I was just picking the lesser two evils, right? I live here, you live there, I'll work, I'll give you a percentage of the money. A few more weeks go by, that doesn't work. After one night of a lot of violence, blood, a broken glass door to my apartment, I called 911, I was done. And I had the courage, and he was arrested for domestic violence charges, which led me to get a restraining order that kept him away. A lot of traffickers aren't going to care about a piece of paper, but I just think there was too much drama and too much heat, and he had all this other money and all these other women he was, working on. He just left me alone. So great, I go to work as a secretary, 9 to 5. I'm falling asleep at the desk. I can't even function. I can't even speak to people, because I hadn't been in that normal life. How do you take someone out of that life for those years and plop them into normal society? It was impossible. At the end of the month, I can't pay my rent. I can't pay all my bills. My car payment was probably as much as I made all month, right? It was just overwhelming. And I started hanging out with new friends, and they're all getting high, and this is when OxyContin was popular. Who remembers that time period? And everyone's coming over, and they're all using OxyContin and cocaine, and they're all drinking, and I start dibbling and dabbling, not realizing that I have a growing drug addiction. All I wanted to do was make that pain go away. And going to therapy once a week, talking to some stranger, wasn't making my pain go away. Like the drugs were making my pain go away. And before I know it, I'm pushed back into the life of prostitution, not with a pimp, but with a giant drug addiction to OxyContin. And so how common is substance abuse, prostitution, and trafficking? Extremely. I work with women today whose own mothers were their first exploiters because the mother was addicted and she traded her daughter for drugs. Okay, and so young girls are exposed to this stuff earlier and earlier. They're either addicted before they get into trafficking, and the trafficker uses that as a way to control them. They get addicted while they're in, or they get addicted on the way out to deal with all the trauma. So life unravels. Of course, you can't do drugs and live a normal, productive life. Time would go on. I'd be addicted to heroin. I'd be sleeping on park benches. I'd be homeless. I'd be trying to manipulate and steal from my beloved grandparents that I told you about. I really, really turned into someone I never would have imagined. In the entire time I was out there on the streets and using and prostituting and all this, I knew I didn't belong, and I just didn't know how to get back. And every time I would OD in a Dunkin' Donut bathroom or wherever, and I was brought to the Mass General, and the EMT would come and Narcan me, they would a lot of times look at me and say, "What are you doing here? Go home." And I couldn't figure it out, but I was like, yeah, go. How do I get there? How do I return? And it took a long, long, long time, in and out of treatments. My brother died in 2006, which would be the next big wake-up call. So I told you he was abused as a kid. He really struggled to find that healing in his life. We lived very parallel, similar lives. He became a male prostitute. Was he ever trafficked? I don't know. But he traveled all over the world. He lived in Sydney, Australia, London, ended up in San Francisco, and then in New York. And by the time he got to New York, he was 36, had HIV, was addicted to crystal meth, and it was just all about that lifestyle and the partying and the whole gay scene and the prostitution. And he didn't wake up one night after partying, and his partner called me and let me know that he had died. And I think his body was just tired. Right? He was just done. And so that was another wake-up call, because I didn't want my parents to have no children, especially my mother, right? So I had to take a good look in the mirror, and I tried to get clean and sober, but it took many, many attempts. And I wanted to do it my way, and I realized that's not how you do it. You got to take suggestions. And so finally, in September of 2007, I got clean, sober, and off the street. So I think 14 or 15 years by this point. Yeah, and you can clap, because that's pretty cool. And it's really only by God's grace that I'm standing here, that I'm still in recovery to this day. Like I said, you would never imagine, if you saw me out in the community in my minivan with my children, that I'm a sex trafficking survivor. But we do recover and we do get well, but it takes a lot of work, right? For the first 5 years, I didn't know I was a survivor. I just knew I was a drug addict who needed to get sober and put my life together. And that's what I did. And I leaned into AA and NA, the 12 steps, which led me onto a spiritual journey, because I wanted to know who this higher power was that they were talking about. And a friend took me to church, and it ended up being a non-denominational Christian church. And that's where I met Jesus. And that's where the people in the church were like Jesus to me, right? They loved me unconditionally. They didn't judge me, took me right under their wing. One lady owned a real estate agency and encouraged me to get my Massachusetts real estate license. And it took me 3 tries. She just kept paying for it and encouraging me. Oh, honey, try again, you'll pass. I'm like, I don't know. She's like, keep doing it every time. And I finally passed, and I was able to rent apartments for the first 5 years of recovery. I had a child at a year clean. I couldn't believe they allowed me to leave the hospital with a human. I didn't even, like, you have to strap them into the car seat so severely in the hospital room that you're even going to trust me to walk away with a human. And he's 13, and he survived, so it's pretty impressive. I feel like he'll need the most therapy probably out of the bunch. Then I got married, and that's a whole other story, right? Because not knowing I was a survivor or a victim even, just knowing what happened to me was horrible. I never wanted to talk about it. I was clean and sober. I was a mother. I was trying to get it together. And I got married, and that's when it all came out, because my husband constantly triggered me. Not on purpose, but just I couldn't be in a vulnerable relationship with a man. I just couldn't. And he wasn't going to tell me what to do, because every time he told me what to do, I felt like he was my pimp, right? It was bad. And after we had our daughter, we separated. And within that separation, I sought deeper healing through counseling and through my faith. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story. It's in the book. But the healing came, and it was pretty miraculous, and it was amazing. And the healing came. It was a journey. It wasn't just like a bam. It was a process. And someone told me that I was a survivor one night. I was in a small group meeting, kind of like this, and we were talking about what women do across the globe to help women and children that are exploited. And there was this one girl who goes on Route 1 Saugus into the strip clubs, and she ministers to all the dancers. So when they're ready to leave the strip club, she's there to support them and help them heal and recover. And I said, can I help? I did that. I danced. I had a pimp. I was on drugs. I did everything you said. How do I help young girls so they don't end up like me? And she said, you're a survivor. You're amazing. And I said, I'm a what? And they're all clapping. Like, I just told my deepest, darkest secret in front of a bunch of strangers, and they're clapping, and they were thrilled. You're a survivor. I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. And she told me about an organization in Boston called My Life, My Choice. And My Life, My Choice hired me based on my lived experience of being a survivor. I felt totally unworthy. I went into that interview like, I don't have a bachelor's degree. I'm not a social worker. They're like, it's okay, tell us your story. And it was the first time I verbally told what happened to me, and the co-founder is a survivor, and everything I said, she understood. And all of a sudden, I felt not alone. And I said, wow. And I started mentoring at-risk girls under 18, girls who had been exploited, girls who came over the border that had been exploited. That's a whole nother story. And I just felt empowered, and I started sharing my story from everywhere to the New York, United Nations. It was amazing, because I just kept saying yes, and the doors just started opening. And every time I shared early on, women would come up to me with tears streaming down their face, telling me they had the same story, but they were too ashamed to talk about it. So I started realizing that so many other women have been affected, but the shame is keeping them silent. And then I started finding women in drug recovery programs, and they kept relapsing. Why? Because they're coming into a drug recovery program. The program can only give them a few skills, keep them sober, get them health insurance. But then guess what? They're triggered. They have no money. They can't buy themselves a pack of cigarettes. They can't buy a bus pass. So they go back to an abusive relationship or go back to working as a prostitute. And because of the shame, they get high the next day, and then they're kicked out of the program, and then they're homeless. And I was like, hold on. I need to come in here. And I started running groups in halfway houses. I started giving out these bags that were filled with toiletries. So many of you had donated tonight. Thank you so much. Because this is what we do from the early days. We give out over 1,000 bags a year to women on the streets and programs, anywhere we can find vulnerable women with these basic necessities to meet their need and to have an open doorway to have a conversation and to let them know there is a better way. And if I can make it off the street, so can you. And so right now, today, just this year, we celebrated 4 women on our team who have 5 years in recovery, who were recipients of Bags of Hope, who we've walked alongside, and now they're survivor leaders, and they're sharing their story, and I've kind of like passed the baton. It's such a beautiful thing. And so that's what we plan to keep doing with the bags that you've donated. So now the ministry is called Jasmine Grace Outreach because we don't just give out the bags, we mentor, we run groups, we do public speaking. We fill in the gaps for a lot of survivors. There's a lack of safe homes across the country, but especially in New England. So a lot of times the survivors we work with, if they're coming out of jail, all these halfway homes need to get into a safe house, so we pay for the plane ticket to get them into another location. Help women get their license, just so many different obstacles that these women face. We just try to fill in that gap for them. And so I've moved to New Hampshire, like I said, so I'm expanding. I still have one employee in Mass with a team of survivors, but now I'm in New Hampshire, and I was able to hire Cindy, who I brought with me here tonight, to continue to do the outreach work in New Hampshire. It definitely looks different than it does in Massachusetts, but we're getting there, we're connecting. So if you know anybody that's in New Hampshire that is looking to connect, whether it be businesses or churches or programs, any way you think I can find an in somewhere, please let us know because we're looking. And with that said, I don't think I finished the story about my husband and I. We separated, we've reconciled. Again, whole nother story, but we've had another child, so she's my favorite because she's 4. And she's cute still and cuddly. And yes, we have 5 kids all together. 2 teenagers of my husband that live with us. Yes, and I homeschool, and why'd I sign up for that? I have no idea. But it's really challenging and beautiful and messy, just like my recovery is, in my marriage and everything else about my life. But I'm so grateful to be here. I want to remind you to get the book. It's $15 or $25 if you'd like to donate one to a woman in need. So a lot of times we meet these women in the programs or in jail, and we give them a book for free. Because once they read it, the light bulbs turn on, and once they can start to know that they're not victims, but survivors, the healing can begin. So again, thank you for your time. Please ask questions, and yeah, thanks.
You can open it up for a Q&A now. Jasmine will field those.
Oh, don't be shy, guys. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Okay. So, is it on? How do you? We have a daughter who's being sexually exploited. She's in New York City, and it's commercial sex, phone sex, online, night flirt. I never realized that Twitter has a dark web. And it was brought to our attention. We knew that she modeled, and she went to art school and did the nude modeling, and now it's like we don't know how to help. And we don't want to push her further away. She came home for Christmas, and that was a miracle, really. But it was brought to our attention after Christmas, after she left, and a relative found all this information, and I'm not out there looking, and it came to our attention, so now we have to figure out a way to help her.
Yeah. How old is she?
She's 27.
I'm so sorry, right? It's so hard to know that someone you love like that is engaged. And we don't know why. We don't know how she got involved. We don't know why she's involved. You don't know the whole story. And so how powerless, right, you must feel as a parent. And I don't have any magical answers. I don't know if you're a woman of faith. I would pray. I would invite others to pray. And I would just talk to her as however you can. I don't know, do you have a relationship with her? Does she call ever? Can you try to say something? Can you bring it up? Can you let her know that you're concerned in a non-judgmental way? Can you tell her your concerns in love? And then if she wants, offer resources. That's the hardest thing. You can't change her, right? And again, you don't know her situation. You don't know if she's being controlled to do that or if she's doing it on her own free will or whatever. But just to even have that conversation in the first place and let her know that you love her, and no matter what, she has maybe a safe place to come home to and parents who love her and are there. And we love you regardless. Send her my book. Send her a link to my website. I don't know. Anything. However you feel led to reach her. A YouTube video, something, right? I have YouTube videos of my story. There's so many other survivors out there with videos that may be similar to what she's experiencing, and if she can just have, again, that light bulb turned on, like, oh, there is a better way. Because I don't know how deep she is in it. And again, I don't know if she's doing it because she wants to, if someone's making her do it, if she thinks she wants to. But just to reach her and let her know there's a better way, you don't have to do that, is, I think, a good first place to start. Yeah. And I'll give you my phone number as well, if I can be any support. So many parents call me, mothers, over the years. And, yeah. You need support, for sure. Yeah.
Aside from making donations, how can we, aside from making donations, actually get involved with supporting women that do this?
Yeah.
To help the survival process.
Right. So in Cape Cod specifically, I just spoke for Cape Cod PATH. You got anyone familiar with Cape Cod PATH? They're the task force down here doing work. I would get involved with them. I don't know who else does anti-trafficking work down here, but I'm sure Melanie in this cafe knows who's doing the work down here. But find organizations that you can volunteer physically with. And any support you give us financially, it would be great, because we are homegrown missionaries. To do the work, we raise our support. Educate, right? Watch documentaries, read survivor books, and then share it with your families. I think about all the young people in our lives, nieces and nephews and people who have to know this information. And I want to say something else that I'm thinking about. This is off your topic, but to the young girls, because on college campuses and even as young as high school, sugaring has become really popular. So these older men will come and offer college girls free tuition and a free rent if they just exchange for companionship, which then slippery slope turns into prostitution. So that's one whole problem, and it's a phenomenon, and it's like on UNH campus in New Hampshire, sugar daddies are posting legit flyers looking for sugar babies on campus. So it's a real thing happening. Number one. Number two, because of OnlyFans and other apps and websites, young girls are posting provocative pictures of themselves online, like Instagram. And then OnlyFans comes along and says, you can post provocative pictures on OnlyFans, but now get paid for it. So now these girls get sucked into it, and they get a following. Now they have a fan base. So now, right, it's feeding that I'm wanted, I'm sexy, I look a certain way, and these men are paying money to be their monthly subscribers. And before you know it, because it's an app and it's so closely related, these men are becoming addicted even faster, and they're texting. They want real life, real-time conversation with a real person, not some, remember phone sex, you couldn't see the person, right? So now think about how different it is and how connected and how personal it is. And these girls get sucked into OnlyFans that way. So those are two big problems that I just want to talk about, things that we have to talk about with people that we know, with the girls in our lives, and so forth. Yeah, back here, this girl.
I was just going to say that is something that is extremely popular with my generation, and I know plenty of girls who are involved in that. And how do you suggest for me to tell these girls that it's like a waste of time? Because I've said those things to them, but I mean, they're just attracted to it. They're attracted to the attention. But how do you break that cycle of attention
Seeking.
Yeah. Seeking.
You can't personally,
Yeah.
right? It's so hard. We are so powerless. Cindy and I were just talking about this on the way down. We can't change people, places, or things, right? All we can do is work on ourselves. And if you're in that situation, be that role model and non-judgmental, right? Love them and say, you know, I've heard, I've read, find articles that these statistics are bad. That's basically exploitation. I know you think it's glamorous, but it's really just sucking you into this life. Your pictures are going to be there. What about when you get married? You have children. Are you going to want them to see this? You know, again, it's so hard. But there are survivors out there. I'm trying to think of one that maybe you can search up. Her name is Harmony Grillo. She's done some articles about it. Also, the Avery Center has done research on OnlyFans and the damage that it's doing to your generation. So maybe just try to give people resources. Yep. Yeah.
What if you want to be that one person, that one resource? What do you think is a good way, besides like reading biographies and doing research so you're aware of what's going on? What is the best way to position yourself in a way that you can be available to be that one person?
You got to go where the women are. And where is, I don't know. You know, in this area, I don't know how you're going to find them. I don't know. But you never know. You know, now that you're looking for it and you want to be available, who knows? And again, I look from a spiritual lens. I don't know who God's going to place in your life. You know what I mean? But you don't know where you're going to be used. And if you're trying to help and you're trying to be involved, I believe those doors will be opened if you have the right heart for it.
Sorry.
I just want to thank you for sharing your story. Pretty amazing, and you're a miracle, and I'm so glad I came out tonight. I went to a conference probably about 12 years ago in New York City, and that's when my eyes were first open to all of this. And one of the things that happens is every Super Bowl, I think about it. And I don't know if people are actually aware of the stuff that goes on. And I think the more you look into it and your eyes are open, the more you can pray for it and get involved. But the whole thing with the Super Bowl and, you know, can you speak to that? If you think they're making strides in cutting down what's been happening there?
Yeah, and it's not just the Super Bowl, but it's anywhere where large amounts of men gather. So when conferences come into Boston, when Super Bowls happen in a city, traffickers know. So they flock to those places with their girls because they know it's going to be real lucrative. So then they post the ads on the websites or the apps, and then it's business, constant. Because again, there's a large gathering of the demand. And that's how that happens. And it happens all day, every day. It's happening right now at this moment. But for it to happen all in a centralized location is good for law enforcement to come in and do busts. Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of times, okay, so to have a case, for a woman over 18, you need to prove force, fraud, or coercion to have a human trafficking case. A lot of times, those victims aren't going to be able to prosecute, right? Because of the mess, because of the trauma, because of the drug addiction, whatever. They're not going to stand on trial in their trafficker right there and tell everybody what he did to her. It happens, but it's not common. So a lot of times law enforcement likes to go after the child cases because it's easier. They're children. You can't have sex with children. And you don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion because the child's under 18. So a lot of times they like to bust those more than the adult cases because it's harder to prove when adult women. Which is good. I'm glad. You know, I want them to go after those traffickers for sure that are exploiting children. But to be aware that it's happening all day, every day. It doesn't matter if you're female, male. I don't want you to also think that traffickers are just male, because again, women can be traffickers too. Labor trafficking, so much is happening. But once you open up that door, you start doing research, you start figuring it out, start putting all the pieces together and see how you can be a part of the solution. First step is coming here to learn, and so I'm grateful. So thank you.
All right, so I'm going to bring Ina up here just to do a few thank yous for some people that helped us get this event off the ground. And then I will close out with our raffle and continue to make cards at your seats. We want to send those home with Jasmine tonight and get a copy of her book if you don't win the raffle.
This event would not be possible without your financial support of Changing the World nonprofit. And I want to say thank you to Cape Cod 5 that was very supportive towards this event and for their concern and compassion towards making our communities safe. Thank you very much, Cape Cod 5. Let's give a hand to Cape Cod 5. And I want to say a very big thank you to Trinity Christian Academy Student Council who took time and wrote encouraging notes and made beautiful bracelets. Thank you very much, students. We want to say thank you to Great Awakening team to making this place available. Thank you very much, Great Awakening team. And we want to say thank you for each of you to being compassionate and open, and you came here, and that's the first step to solution. And I just want to say that no one is immune from human trafficking. I saw high status women and young ladies who went online on social media and went on a blind date, and I interviewed some woman who got some powdered drugs into their coffee and drink, and then they were trafficked and their parents were looking for them. So no one is immune. Anyone can get into that, even if they grew up in a beautiful home, safe home. You know, it's possible it can happen to anyone, and we have to be on guard. In the Proverbs, there is a word that says, "Guard your heart. Above all else, guard your heart, because out of your heart, your life flows." And we should be guarding our hearts, our families, our communities, and speak on those things. Educate ourselves and speak up and talk about it, and that's the first steps. And thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. Thank you very much. We want to give you a hand again. Thank you. And Melanie, thank you so much for bringing your friend. Thank you very much. Would you end us with a word of prayer?
I'm going to end with a raffle and then prayer. Okay, here we go. These are some people that signed up online, so that's how I kind of got the names and all the things. So actually, I'm going to have Jasmine pick it. Abigail here. Oh, congrats, you win the book. So, come on up. Is this, I think, yes, this is one you sent me. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is. So you got a signed copy. I know you're currently reading it. She's actually currently reading the book. So actually, you know, you can use it or give it to someone else. Pass it on, for sure. Thank you. And Abigail works in the field here locally. So, one more thank you.
So one more thank you to Representative Steve Exares, who will bring a lot of items. He's our representative. Thank you very much. And another thing, on February 4th, we will have 3 state representative coffee with your representative. Please come at 9 a.m. And February 11th, we will have a speaker who is the therapist, Tracy. We will talk about healthy sexuality from the pure perspective. So please come. We will touch on those topics that you mentioned about addictions and how to overcome those. So please welcome February 11th evening and February 4th morning. Thank you very much again.
So I'll close this in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this evening, Lord, this evening of light and hope in such darkness, Lord. We know this world is dark, and we know that everyone in this room has been through something dark, but there are some things that are darker than others, Lord. And I just pray over every person that's experienced this violation, Lord, that we can come alongside women, girls, men and boys, both on the side of demand and on the side of being exploited, Lord. Just step into our hearts, Lord. Don't let us leave here and do nothing, Lord. And I just pray, I pray a blessing over Jasmine and her family, Lord. Her courage speaks volumes, Lord, for so many reasons and for so many things. I thank you so much for rescuing her so that she could become a rescuer, Lord. And I just pray for every woman that she works with, that they feel the empowerment that she feels today, Lord, that you know, those faces and names become people to those around them, Lord, that we are we are here to walk alongside people. We are here to do something with what we know. And now we can't say that we don't know. And so I just pray that you stir our hearts for this cause, Lord. Stir our hearts, break our hearts for what breaks yours. And I just thank you so much for this opportunity to bring my dear friend to my community here on Cape Cod. And I just pray that we can band together as this room of people that have been impacted by Jasmine's message of hope, that we can do something about it, and that we can come alongside her, come alongside people in our lives, that we can be a voice of hope and of light to those around us. And I just thank you so much for this evening. I pray that everyone travels home safely, especially Jasmine on her 2-hour drive back. We thank you for getting her here safely. We thank you for taking care of her family at home, Lord. And we lift all of these things and so many more that I'm sure are going on in our hearts and minds today and tonight. And I hope that we carry this with us, forever, Lord, that we just continue to do good in what is evil. We just love you and we praise you in your son's precious and holy name. Amen.
Changing the world is up to me and with you, but are we deaf to the noise? So our soul hears a tune. Will I wake up inside or will it go by in a blur? Just what it's gonna take now if I wanna change the world.